him down here. All right. And let's make sure we are popping up. And there we are. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I usually do a good morning to you song, but I won't be doing that this morning. Hello, 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 and welcome to Daring Dialogues Black Table Talk Edition. I am here today with a special guest, Mr. Andre Henry. Andre Henry is a best selling author and award winning musician and activist. And we are here today to talk about his work, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. This is a stellar work. I highly recommend everyone check out his work. This work has been, I would say, instrumental in helping me to understand some things about resistance, about revolution, and about what it's going to take in order for us to bring about effective and transformative change. Andre, welcome to the platform today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get started with our very first question here. Tell us a little bit about your impetus behind this book, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep. Tell us your impetus.
For sure. So, what I'll say is first off that my book is kind of a Trojan horse. It is, and I think a lot of people do get not confused, but maybe misled by the title. And so they think that this book is about white people. But this book is not about white people. This book is about really my journey of learning or unlearning some of
Mm-hmm.
the colonial indoctrination that we go through as Black people, and learning what it's going to take to actually get free. And
Mm-hmm.
my desire in writing the book was actually that I have been on a journey for several years to understand how do ordinary people work together to change the world? How do we affect positive change? And that has taken me on a journey of through so many, classic works on revolution, both nonviolent and armed struggle, and with meeting folks who have led revolutions themselves, people who have led worldwide movements, people who have taken on major corporations and won. And
Mm-hmm.
I have the feeling of why doesn't why doesn't everyone know this stuff? The things that I was learning on that journey, why don't we all know that? And we know why we all don't know these
Mm-hmm.
things. So when I got the opportunity to write a book, I wanted to put everything in there that I could, that I have learned to help spread this information, especially because a lot of this information, you don't encounter it if you're not reading like scholarly work or if you're
Right.
not intentionally seeking out some of the classic works, like even Dr. King's writing. If you're not specifically looking for the things that Dr. King said and wrote, aside from the "I Have a Dream" section of his speech from the March on Washington, then you won't
Yes.
learn it. And so I had an opportunity to write a book that would be in Target, in Walmart, in Barnes and Noble, and all these other mainstream places, Amazon. And so I wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. And so that really is a lot of my motivation for writing what I did.
I will tell you, the title was definitely what caught me.
Mhm.
But as you said, as I started diving into your work, what really impressed me about it was that you were condensing so much important information about movements and resistance in your work while at a parallel level telling your story.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people sort of fight with that when they're trying to write. They either wind up just telling their story and leave out sort of the theory and the doctrines behind it.
Yeah.
And you were really able to do both. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a scholarly student of King, but I went on my own journey of reading through King's works and realizing how much about King had been condensed down, watered down, filtered through, to the point where I found a writing of his that had pretty much been buried.
Wow.
And I had to go through a little bit of a legal tussle with the
Yeah.
King family to
Oh,
to
wow.
to put that work out there, because it is one of his less popular writings, but he really digs into whiteness.
Uh-huh.
It's called the Unchristian Christian, or the Unfit Christian,
Uh-huh.
and it was published way back like in the 60s in like a Jet or Ebony magazine.
Wow.
And you can't find it outside of that, but I happen to have the original copy of the magazine, so I typed it out, and the family came after me for doing it.
Really?
And so I had to address it as a fair use issue, and I had to write a critical review on it in order to re-release it. um but it's
Wow.
a very, very powerful work, and it's not one that a lot of people know about. So
Yeah.
I was like, I want to put this back out there, because again, to your point, people know about the letter from the a Birmingham jail, but they don't know about this work that goes a little bit harder
Yeah.
on the Christian space. And so I was like, yeah, I see why you don't want this particular writing out there, because it goes against this sort of narrative of just kumbaya with Christian leaders.
Right.
He was really addressing whiteness in the Christian space and the racism, the rampant racism that was happening there. Um, and so I appreciate you sharing with us the impetus behind this work. And it is, to me, it is a part of the Underground Railroad of revolution and resistance. So grab this book. Again, grab this book. Up here on the screen as we talk, you'll see Andre's information, his website, how to contact him. And also, if you want to give to the work that he is currently doing, his PayPal information is up here as well. So again, as we're moving through, I want to ask this next question. Why is it so important for us to draw a line and connect the dots between our past revolutions and the present conditions here in the United States?
Yeah, there's so many reasons for this. And one of them is that we are in a long struggle. That's one. And at the same time, a lot of the times when we need to act quickly. We need to act fast.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens a lot with our movements, especially as more people are becoming engaged over the past decade, we've had so many uprisings over the past decade. We have new people that are starting from scratch, right? And are acting from not that these are bad things. I'm not criticizing, but a lot of us are acting from reflex, from emotion, from instinct, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not bad, but it's not necessary to depend on those resources alone. We have history, as Rachel Maddow says, we have history here to help us,
Mm-hmm.
where we can look back into the past and we can see what has worked against some of the dynamics that we're fighting against today in the past. You know,
Mm-hmm.
on top of that, so my book really deals a lot with nonviolent struggle. And when you look at the history of how nonviolent struggle has been practiced, you see that the principles of nonviolent struggle have pretty much remained consistent throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so if we understand that history, if we know those things, then we don't have to start from scratch and make the same mistakes or try to happen upon the same discoveries as people who have already made them. We can build on what has already come before us.
Yes. And I think, to your point, when you said that people are acting from reflex, emotion, and instinct, what I am finding online, literally 48 hours I've been dealing with this, is people coming into my space either assuming I don't have a history with resistance and revolution. I have my own story. Don't have a book yet, but I have my own story of how I got into resistance work and the kinds of work I've done. they either assume you don't know, or there's an elitist attitude of I know more than you. And
Yes.
so in either one of those places, I find people get bogged down in arguing with each other
Yes.
about who's the better activist
Right.
versus actually doing the work. And
Yeah.
I had to tell a gentleman last night who was in the weeds in my comments, and he wanted to just go toe to toe with me. And I'm like, listen, it's not helping us to rage against each other.
Not at all.
I'm not your enemy. Like, I just need you to just go back to the last year of work I've been doing. Look through my page first before you come attack me about what you feel I am or am not doing.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the tension sometimes that we feel is this argumentative space. It's like, I know you're frustrated, but don't take your frustration out on people who are on your side.
Yeah.
People who are trying to do the work, people who are coming with sincere intentions. And most of the people who follow my page here know that I don't necessarily ascribe to the word ally or allyship.
Yeah.
I feel like allies can jump in and out, but I do ascribe to co-conspiratorship. I do say, hey, if you are about the John Brown energy, we can hang.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I need John Brown energy. I don't need you flipping and flopping. And, I've got to coddle your sensibilities when we're all literally in the fight of our lives. Another thing that I want to point out too, as you said, that we have history to help us with what has already worked.
Yeah.
Yes, we can tweak it. We don't have to rewrite the whole script. And I think it's important for us to help people who are just coming into the resistance space to just get caught up to speed. Even if it's just, hey, here's some materials to read. Here's a course, a crash course in some resistance. Here's some helpful tips. If you're going to go out and do resistance in the form of marching and getting into a physical space, here's some things you need to be aware of. Here's how to protect yourself in that kind of environment. So helping people to get caught up to speed. The other piece is, as Coretta Scott King said, and I think it's important for us to remember this, is that we have to remember that freedom, as she said, has to be won in every generation.
Right.
Because of the way that the powers that be operate in our society, they're not just going to let us rest on our laurels of the work that's been done in the past. So yes, when you look up and you see things being rolled back, when you see civil rights being attacked, understand it's always been attacked. It's just been ramped up. So it's not like these people just all of a sudden decide to attack our civil rights and our human rights. No, this has been going on. The connection here is, what are we going to do in our generation to resist and to fight back and to maintain our gains and to keep moving forward?
Yeah, there's a problem that I see with our current movements where a lot of people are reluctant to learn. People don't want to learn things. It's a resistance to that. And I write about that in the book too. If we have to be able to understand that just because we're on the right side of history, that we might be championing the right causes, that does not mean that we are right about everything. And that doesn't mean that we know everything either. And so, that one of my mentors led the Serbian Revolution, overthrew Slobodan Milosevic in the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere around that area in time. And one of the things that he has said in the interview that I did with him, and I believe that he wrote it in his book too, is that one of the greatest investments that we can make into our movements is to educate ourselves, is to learn, And when we look at the civil rights movement, that is what the civil rights movement did as well. They sent people over to India to learn from Gandhi and to learn from Gandhi's people. And they brought lessons about what they learned in India back to the United States. And then they developed it more. They improved on that more. And when they did actions, they would regroup and they would talk about what went well and what didn't what didn't go well, what's working, what's not working, and they would learn in the process. And that's something that we have to do today. And I know that you have more questions, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just want to emphasize this and use an example. The recent Palestine uprisings or the uprisings we had on behalf of Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote an article about the student encampment saying that, there was a certain point where I was watching online and I saw this young man's head was dripping, was oozing blood after an encounter with the police. And it reminded me of an occupation that I was involved in 2020. And it reminded me of Occupy Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And from my experience of occupations and also understanding some of the history of Occupy Wall Street, I understand that when you decide to do that type of action and occupation, there comes a point where whatever the message of the occupation can get lost because you're spending so much time trying to defend the occupation from attacks.
Yeah.
And so then you have to remember that the reason why you mounted the occupation was not to defend the occupation, but to send the message about whatever injustice that you were doing. And when you get to that point, you might need to think about breaking camp and doing something else, so that you can keep the message on that. And also so that you can preserve your resources. I wrote that article and people got upset with me. And I'm sitting here going, but we've done this before. We've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
So why not take the lessons from the Occupy movement? I'm not saying don't do an occupation, but take the lesson. Like Michael White, who's one of the movement's founders, said that he thinks that you can only hold an occupation for about a month, about 28 days, right? So why not take that lesson and say, okay, we might be able to hold this for a few weeks. While we're doing it, let's take stock of our resources. Let's figure out who we have and who we might be able to potentially bring to our side. And let's plan out 10 more actions we can do when we break camp,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the advantage of learning from the past, is that you're not starting at ground zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're starting at a place where you already have some wisdom that you can build upon.
Yes. Now, and to that point, I want you to talk a little bit about, because the first place I heard about the 3.5% was actually through your writing.
Okay.
It made sense to me once I read it,
Mhm.
because I had lived it. And when I talk about resistance work, I talk about it from the standpoint of, I started in the Christian space.
Mhm.
I started with ministering the gospel. I started with open air ministry.
Right.
I was heavily into the pro-life movement, which for me became pro-choice. And so I saw from the conservative standpoint what they were doing in terms of occupying space, in terms of addressing people and all that. And to their credits, many times they actually do occupation better than some of the liberal counterpoints. Not for the right reasons,
Right.
but they often have a better plan, or they have it more planned out sometimes. But talk to us about the 3.5%. And some people have heard of it, some people have not. So if you can give a little bit of background around that.
Right. So the 3.5% threshold, we used to call it a rule. We're moving away from calling it a rule because people are misusing it and treating it like it's a magic number or like it's formulaic. And nothing in creating positive change is formulaic. So we're calling it a threshold. It comes from a study that was done by two scholars named Erica Chenoweth. I had to check myself because sometimes I accidentally call her Elizabeth. Her name is Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Steffen. Now, in this study, they studied 627 conflict situations between 1900 and 2019. And what they found a lot of interesting things, but I've been asked about one. And one of those findings was that no oppressive regime, and this included totalitarian regimes, this included authoritarian regimes, had withstood the sustained nonviolent resistance of just 3.5% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
So what that tells us is that, because oftentimes what you hear when people talk about social change is a lot of people go, we need everybody. We need everybody. In fact, I saw one creator the other day on Threads, John Pavlovitz, who was, he's upset about Kamala Harris losing the election. Obviously, we prefer Kamala Harris to win to Trump.
Right.
But what he was saying was, well, now we need, I think he said, now we need hundreds of millions of people to become activists. You know, his point was, you know, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you, who, you know, for whatever reason, you know, didn't behave the way that he wanted to at the polls. Now, the way that I looked at that was, you're spreading despair unnecessarily. Don't do that.
Right.
Because we don't need hundreds of millions of people.
We sure don't.
The numbers, and we definitely don't need everybody, which is an assumption that many people make. We need a small percentage of the people who will be active and consistently active, and to wage struggle skillfully, you know, until the work is done.
Somebody needs to type that into the chat, please. Wage struggle skillfully.
Yeah.
And I'm going to add to that, and back the people waging struggle skillfully. I think, to your point, one of the most powerful things that people failed to, and I say still grasp, about the civil rights movement is how many people were backing the civil rights movement. There were comedians, there were artists, there were singers, there were people who you may not have seen out front in the marches that were financially supporting the movement. There were the church mothers who were doing the baking, who were doing the cooking, who were feeding the people being trained. And as you said, education is so important. We often talk about Rosa Parks and the bus boycott, right? She's often become the poster child for a lot of what people do as far as protests. But Rosa Parks got training. She got leadership training from Septima Clark.
Right.
Septima Clark ran citizenship schools where she trained a group of teachers, over 1,000 teachers, and then those teachers got students, and then those students were the ones who were moving out into the protest space, the open protest. But it came from a root source of education. And so we have a lot of people who want to do the action of resistance and revolution, but they don't want to get that root foundation. And unfortunately, a lot of people have gotten hurt physically,
right,
because they've not done the education part. And then it becomes a resentment of, now I'm hurt, now I'm injured, but it's like, you got to go back to the root. I want to ask you, as I know that you are right now, you are based in Medellin.
Yes.
What are some possible ways forward in the United States in light of what we see happening with the current administration?
Yeah, so
I know that's a broad question, so narrow it down as you need to.
Well, there's some points that need to be made. One is that people have to understand that we are in newish territory. The newish part is the authoritarian part.
Yes.
Which some political scientists, some experts that I'm following, don't expect that the United States will become a classic dictatorship, but more so, at least not now. At least that's not the next phase. Not likely. That the next phase is likely something what they call competitive authoritarianism, or what other people call a hybrid regime, where the democratic institutions that we have will likely continue to endure and likely continue to be meaningful. But the people who already hold power will abuse their access to that power so much that they will rig the game in their favor so much that it will be hard to get them out of office. More in the same way that we see some regimes in the world that on their face are democracies, but the rulers are authoritarian because they continue to rig elections and things like that. So that's important for us to understand that that's what some people think. That's where some experts think that we're going, at least in the next phase. When we understand that, we have to understand that you cannot just vote these people out. You can't just vote them out. So we cannot wait until the midterms to deal with this. This is happening lightning quick. It's happening right now. And so what we must understand is something that our predecessors understood in this country. And that is, when you cannot depend on the official political channels, you must work outside of them. And so the way that they did that is by waging nonviolent struggle. And so that's what we have to do. We have to increase our resistance skills and our knowledge of how nonviolent struggle works. Now, we can talk about why I keep talking about nonviolence later, because I don't want to take up too much time with that question, with that on this question. But those are some immediate things that we have to understand. First off, where we're going, which is probably into competitive authoritarianism. And that number two, depending on the vote is not enough. We have to understand the power of collective action and to use that power. And then what it's going to take is a nationwide movement in order to create the kind of America that we want to live in. It will not be centralized. So it will not be one leader from one region of the country or one organization. It will be many different groups that are aligned in values and in their practice and methods. And we are going to have to create a core, build up to a core, rather, of at least 3.5% of the population. It may not be exactly 3.5%. It could be 4%. It could be 5%. It could be less than we expect. But there's going to have to be a core of individuals who are committed to creating nonviolent disruption in the United States until the work is done. And to your point, Shante, that the 3.5% is often referred to as active popular support. Behind that active popular support is also passive popular support. That's the 50% of America. That's the 50% of America that agrees with what the active 3.5% are doing, right? And are supporting them. And what that is going to have, and what that's going to have to take is a shift in consciousness. The good news about that is that shift in consciousness is already happening. It's been happening. That's why in 2020 people on the street saying things like abolish the police, defund the police. And 4 years before then, some of those people did not have that consciousness. It's working. It's also why we're in the position we're in now, where the forces who are in support of racist power are fighting so hard to kill DEI initiatives, to ban books, all those kinds of things, because it is working. So we're going to have to continue to move in that direction of shifting the consciousness of America, because that is literally half the battle.
Amazing. Thank you for summarizing that. And hopefully as people come back and watch and review, that will begin to sink in. Yeah. One thing for me, when you talked about that 50% of support, I have to remind people, because everybody's like, oh, well, the country. I'm like, no, let's go and look at the data, even on voting, because we know voting is one part of what we should be doing. It's not the whole. I said, if you look at the data, about 23% of America fell in line with the felon in chief 4547.
Mm-hmm.
23%. So
Mm-hmm.
that's not the entire country
There
that's
you,
moving in that direction.
there you go.
So you have to actually go back and look at the numbers and the data and understand that there are more with us than there are against us.
Exactly.
And also recognize that because media, our mainstream or what they call legacy media now, is now widely controlled by the voice of felon in chief 4547,
Mm-hmm.
it can appear that they are more because they have the legacy microphone.
Yes. Yes.
So beyond the legacy microphone, these kind of platforms, hello, these kind of platforms, as they continue to grow, as we continue to support, as you said, moving outside of the norm,
Mm-hmm.
as we continue to support that, people will begin to see, oh, there are other voices out here speaking. There are other people out here pushing back against it. But because of the way our media is set up right now, it appears as if there's more on that side. And so when you pay too much attention to legacy media, you do fall into that sense of despair. You do fall into that, I don't know if it's possible for us to move forward, or what can we do. It does breed that sense of helplessness.
Right.
And that's what it's designed to do. But as you said, the shift in consciousness is happening. It
Yeah.
may not be happening at the pace that we want, but it is happening. So we have to continue to go and to continue to move and make sure that you're a part of that shift happening. I try to, encourage people who are coming into my space saying, it feels helpless. What can we do? What can we do? You are a part of the doing.
Yes.
We are the people we've been waiting on.
Well,
I had to
another
recognize that. Go ahead.
sorry, another part of that question is that a lot of people they are they're measuring their individual capacity against the systemic capacity of the powers that be.
Yeah.
That's a part of where the overwhelm is coming in. We understand that we have a big problem and it's going to require a big solution. But as with anything big, you've got to break that down into manageable parts. I
Mhm.
recently read a study about the Sudanese revolution that ousted Bashir al-Bashir in 2018, 2019. And one of the things that it didn't surprise me because I understand that revolutions always start small, but I was reminded as I was reading it because what they did to, okay, where the revolution ended, and we know Sudan still has its problems. So let's not get caught up in the fact that no revolutionary story ends with and they lived happily ever after. Let's just
Mhm.
talk about the accomplishment of getting al-Bashir ousted. The end of that movement looked like 800,000 Sudanese people occupying the capital. But it began with a few students pushing for changes in the elections in their university. The Serbian Revolution that ousted Slobodan Milosevic at the end looked like 70,000 Serbs demanding that the dictator resign. But it began with 10 college students deciding that they wanted to live in a freer Serbia. So, what I'm saying is that, yes, we do have a big problem to address, but
Mhm.
that the revolution begins hyper locally. It begins where you have power, right? And so don't overwhelm yourself saying, well, I don't have the power to stop Elon Musk or Donald Trump. You're right. You as an individual do not. But everyone can participate in the growing consciousness that is necessary to change America. In whatever sphere of influence you have, be it your family or your workplace or a club that you're a part of or that you started, or the list goes on, your friend group, your children, your home. You have that kind of power. And so don't underestimate that, because it's those small acts that will never make it into the history books, that will never make it into a documentary, that are going to be the things that actually set the groundwork for those huge dramatic events down the road.
And to your point, Andre, as I was explaining to you when we were doing sort of our pre-talk here, I started this platform with another platform, Daring Dialogues. Daring Dialogues has 1,500 followers. As I began that platform, I began to see that there was a need for more specific conversation around what was happening with Black America and the diaspora at large. I started this platform in 2019, before there was a George Floyd, right?
Right.
So in 2019, I was saying, there's really some things that Black people want to talk about. We want to talk to us
Right.
in a way that's not legacy media controlled.
Right.
Well, that was 2019. Here it is 6 years later, with a platform that started with one person, and we're at 131,000 voices. 95,000 of us who are on here actively every single week, because I see the data.
Right.
So never underestimate, as you said, never underestimate your power in the individual scheme of things, but also your power in the collective. You might think that what you're doing is small and insignificant. You might even think that, hey, I'm writing a blog and nobody's listening to it. I'm starting a blog and one or two people are reading it every week. Start the dang on thing. Start the blog. Write the music. Put it out there. And yes, you can feel overwhelmed, but don't underestimate your power for an individual action to begin to flow into something larger and greater. And what I want to encourage people who are doing the small local work is that when you see the ability to connect to another stream, start connecting to the other streams. As you said, we don't have all of the answers, but we have our parts. And as we start putting our parts together, those streams become that mighty ocean.
Well, I want to add to that as well. And sorry to cut you off, but the thing is that a lot of times what we don't understand, because we are in this mass protest area, is that everybody wants to start with the biggest action possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on a faulty theory of change. So people think that if we get as many people out in the streets and protest, then that's where the pressure is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem with that is that the powers that be know that you only have that 750,000 people for a day.
Right.
Yeah, you can get 1 million people out into the streets for a day in America, maybe even 2 days. You might be able to get 250,000 people out for a month. But what the powers that be know is that we're not built from the ground up. That resistance is not built from the ground up. They know that we don't have everybody's contact information. They know that all these people are not trained. They know that we don't have the mutual aid networks to feed these people indefinitely and all that kind of stuff. And so they can wait us out.
Mm-hmm.
So the importance of understanding that when you work locally, that you are building more infrastructure and more power, more capacity from the ground up to sustain your movement. So I brought up the example of Sudan. Because Sudan's revolution was so widely dispersed, because it had been built up from the smaller towns and then eventually moved into the capital to do this huge occupation, it wasn't as easy to dissipate because they had already been built up over time locally. There's also a connection between the local and the national. So we got national legislation in the United States for civil rights because of local campaigns. I have been a part of campaigns that have tried to start nationally. It's hard, it's overwhelming, it's nearly impossible. But think about the example of Birmingham, for instance. The Birmingham campaign was isolated to one city. The goal was to desegregate the business district of Birmingham, because of that, it made it much easier to measure the way that power moves through Birmingham, who has the power and what are their relationships to one another, to chart out the geography of where those actions would happen. And then from overwhelming Birmingham, and also let's talk about how strategic of a site that was. Birmingham was known as the most racist city in America, Birmingham. So there was the idea that if it could change in Birmingham, it can change anywhere, right? And that's kind of what happened, was that Birmingham was desegregated, and that led to the March on Washington. That led to federal legislation. So we have to understand that when we are working locally, that we actually are creating the possibility for this to spread nationally. So
yes.
when I say locally, I don't want for you all to think, all of you are watching and listening, I don't want for you to think individualistically.
Right.
Yes, work in your families. Yes, work in the place where you have influence, but also connect with other groups that are locally working and figure out, how can you fight fascism, racism, oppression in your town, in your neighborhood, in your city? Who can you band with together and work with in those local places? Because that is the base of the revolution. We can all go to Washington tomorrow, but how long can we stay in Washington? That's the question. And we all can't stay in Washington for very long if we don't have those local roots. That's what makes those actions like the March on Washington more even possible, because there were several different organizations, right, that came together to make that happen. Those local organizations are invaluable.
Yes. I almost said Pastor Andre. You have given us, and I hope people are taking this in, you've given us some invaluable points in terms of helping us to understand, how do I go from the micro to the macro?
Yes.
We need some micro revolutions that
Yes.
build into the macro. I think about another example of sort of a micro that grew into the macro. I think about what happened with Trayvon Martin. I am Florida born, but I am not in Florida currently. Haven't been there since 2011. But I know a lot of the people in the political sphere in Florida. And one of the gentlemen, an attorney friend of mine, who they held a sit-in in the Capitol when Trayvon Martin was unalived. And those were the Dream Defenders. A lot of people talk about Black Lives Matter, but that initially started with young students that were doing a sit-in at the governor's at the Capitol, outside of the governor's office. That's where that started. As you said, again, it's that local few students that said, we're not leaving until we start getting some answers about what happened. And again, to your point, local campaigns move to national campaigns.
Right.
Local campaigns move to national campaigns. And so one of the comments here says, we have to fight individualism within community. That is an important point. And it goes back to that self-education and decolonizing your own mindset, your own process. You cannot focus on and operate in rugged individualism if you're going to be in community in a movement. So definitely something we want to look at. I know we're running out of time here. I want to just ask one more question here. Because as activists and people in the activist space, many people are running into some burnout already. It's only been 30 days into the blitzkrieg that has been happening with United States politics.
Yes.
What are some intentional things that you found to help ground you mentally when it comes to navigating anti-truth, anti-democratic spaces in leadership, and we're talking the climate we're in here, is very anti-truth, very anti-democratic. We see what is happening in terms of the unconstitutional actions that's being taken on a daily basis. What are some things that you would recommend for people who are going to be in this space for the long haul on how to take care of their mental health and their mental wellness in this work?
Okay, so there are two things. One is that you have to attend to the first terrain of the struggle, which is your body. That's number one. Number two is that you have to refuse to play the part that the oppressor expects you to. So I'm going to expound on both of those things. So one, the first terrain of oppression, which also makes it the first site of liberation, is your body. You have to tend to that first. Because if you lose your physical vitality or your spiritual vitality, you will not be resisting for very long. And so what that means basically, as simply as it can be put, is to take good care of yourself. You have to drink water. You have to rest. You have to eat. You have to do some things that bring you joy. You have to connect with people who share your values and your loved ones, all those things. And all of those things are not just forms of resistance. They are forms of resistance. They are also forms of fortification, right? And those are ways that you are dealing directly with the effects of oppression on your own body, right? You are intervening against that. There's one wellness doctor. He's a psychologist, actually. His name is why am I drawing a blank on this man's name? I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this man's name. So I'm just gonna have to come back to it because that'll have to come back to me. But he says that you have the most responsibility where you have the most power. Mm-hmm. Now let's bring that into this realm where we understand that our wellness is impacted by the system that we live under. If you have the most responsibility where you have the most power, then you have to ask yourself, do you have the most responsibility in the White House? Do you have the most responsibility in Congress, at City Hall, on the school board, or do you have the most responsibility in your own body? So that's your greatest responsibility, is to do those things. You don't do those things, you're not going to be much use to the movement. And even if you are of use to the movement, you won't be of use for very long. What I mean by not playing the role that the oppressor has for you is that you must understand this. And this is not just theory. Steve Bannon, I'm just gonna put flesh on it. Steve Bannon, who was a top Trump advisor, I don't remember if he is now, but he was. Mm-hmm. He said that the goal is to flood the zone. We want to throw so much at them that they won't be able to keep track of the actions that we're taking that are most important to us.
Right.
So your opponent just told you what role they want for you to play. They want to overwhelm you with information to make it impossible for you to act, or to make it very difficult for you to act. So don't play that role. If you know that the thing that they want for you to do is be overwhelmed by information glut, then do not be gluttonous with the information that they're giving you. Mm-hmm. Then you have to monitor your intake, and you have to decide what that looks like, about what news sources you trust, when you are going to take in the news, what you're going to do with all of that, because that is also a way that you are protecting yourself. So I'm not saying be unaware, check out, but you have to do it in moderation and do it in a way that empowers you and not in a way that disempowers you. And those are the things that I am doing, is that I do practice wellness, for myself in the ways that I can. I practice gratitude because I know that the brain has a tendency to focus on the negative and to keep score of the negative and put a lot of weight on the negative. And so I have to keep track of the positive, right? Because that's the way that I counterbalance that, I practice what they call savoring, which is anytime that I'm in a good moment, I pause internally and I take a deep breath and I count to 5. And I try to record whatever is happening in that moment in my nervous system so that I can bring it back later, you know, so that even though the world is on fire and it is depressing and it is infuriating, I basically feel okay,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I don't feel okay from a point of ignorance or a point of privilege. I know what's going on, you know, but I'm not overwhelmed, you know.
That is fantastic. Again, I do a practice myself where I say breathe with me. Sometimes I'll come on here. You can go through my reels and see the times that I've done some active breathe with me exercises for people to help them to regulate their nervous system. But you're absolutely right. We have to monitor our intake. We have to decide what sources we're going to trust. I put up an image and some information about who owns the sources, and
Yeah.
then I also put up some information about here are some alternative sources you can check out. Now, I'm not going to explore all the sources for you. I'm going to provide you the information. And then you have to make that decision about what sources you're going to trust. And like you said, and when you are taking in that information, I am trying to do better. I am a night owl. So I'm trying to do better about limiting my intake in the evening time. But in the morning, for sure, I don't try to touch any piece of news before 10 o'clock because I need my mind to be focused on victory. I need my mind to be focused on what's going to help me to overcome. As an educator, I need my mind to be focused on how can I best serve my students, both young and adult. Talk to us as we begin to close out here. Talk to us a little bit about the work that you're doing with music in activism. One of your favorite songs of mine is "Make It to Tomorrow." I
Yeah.
play that quite a bit. So talk to us a little bit about your music.
Yeah, well, you know, my music has always been my first love. That is, I always say, no one, no one said, no one grows up, no kid says they want to be activists. That's what I say. You know, like you don't ask a 5-year-old what they want to be when they grow up and they say they want to be activists. That is something that is the moment demands it of you, or your social position demands it of you, or whatever the times demanded of you. So my activism came out of, you know, the mental stress of dealing with racism. And the first way that that came out was by me deciding that I was going to start writing songs about racism. I've been a songwriter since I was 8 years old, but I decided that, you know, now I need to shift the topic of my writing to what is my experience of being Black. And that has been the crux of what I do. I never want to be dehumanized into just like this one-dimensional social justice advocate, you know. So anyway, I learned through getting involved in activism how traumatic that is in itself can be, how exhausting in itself it can be when you're not just dealing with the stress of oppression, but you're dealing with the stress of trying to fight it. Some of that stress caused by other activists, which we don't have time to get into. And so I started writing songs about what it feels like. Because when I made that decision initially to start writing about what it means, or writing about the Black experience, I started writing songs about police brutality. I started writing songs about protests. I started writing songs, those kind of things. And you know what I noticed? I noticed that my Black friends and Black supporters of my music didn't really want to listen to it. And that's because it was re-traumatizing. You know, it's like they're like, this is not bad. It's just I already know the police are beating people up. You know, I don't want to listen to that in my car. You know, and so I started writing songs from my journey of burnout, and from taking the feedback that I was just talking about and saying like, I need to grow some inner strength. There's some resilient skills that I need to cultivate. And I've been writing songs about that for a few years now, and writing from that place. And so, like the song you said, "Make It to Tomorrow," is similar to the story I tell in my book about me dragging around this boulder for to show the mental stress of being Black in the United States. And make it to tomorrow is a song that expresses that emotion. You know, saying that, you know, sometimes sometimes it depresses me to the point where I do ask, what is the point of living in a world with so much oppression, so much violence, especially when it feels unbeatable, you know? And I'm writing songs right now. I have a collection of songs right now that I mentioned my healing journey and my resilience journey of writing songs about specific resilience skills, hoping to bring some relief,
Yes.
to those of us who are experiencing this kind of stress and who are trying to do something about it.
Which leads me to the second song that I really love, which is We Are Tomorrow Makers.
Oh,
Every single person. And it was almost like I sensed the shift in your music when it came to that, because it was like, I hope I'm going to make it to tomorrow, but also guess what? We are the tomorrow makers. We are the ones who are shaping tomorrow. So I encourage people to check out Andre's music. He's on all platforms, but you've got some collections over, I believe, on Spotify, that are sort of separated to help people navigate through your work. Um, Final thoughts. I know we have to close here, but I want you to give us your final thoughts.
my final thoughts are, as always, that I want for us to understand our power. I want for us to understand that oppressors cannot continue to rule the way that they do without our consent, you know. And I'm not saying that in an easy way, a flippant way. I do understand that the powers that shouldn't be are capable of a stunning amount of violence. They have a stunning capacity for violence and to repress dissent and protest and all kind of stuff. But the United States is not yet there. We are not yet there where some other countries are and other regimes are, where we can't fight back against this. As I have said for years, it doesn't have to be this way, and the reason why I say that it doesn't have to be this way is because, like the game of Simon Says that I often play with people, I give people a couple of commands. It's a couple of simple, innocent commands, and then I start telling people, things like Simon Says, make out with the stranger, or Simon Says, stand up and pull your pants down, or Simon Says, punch somebody in the stomach, and nobody ever does these things. And when I ask them, after them refusing to obey the command, well, then who has the power in the game? They realize that it's us, it's we do, that 3.5% of the population that says, until the powers that be either leave or do what we say, things are not going to work around here. That is the power that we've always had, and that's the power that we have to use. A new world is possible. It does not have to be this way, because we are tomorrow makers.
Andre Henry, this has been a pleasure. It's been a real honor talking with you today and having you to share with my audience here, with my people of all ethnic backgrounds. And I want to encourage those of you who are listening today to please go back, hit the rewind button, watch this video again, be empowered by the words and the wisdom that has been shared today. If you can, go, don't walk, run and get this book, All the White Friends I Couldn't Keep by Andre Henry. Andre, is there an audio version of this book available?
Yes, there is.
All right. So for my audio folks, hit it up on your audiobook platform, and please check out this work. He has given us so many empowering things inside that we did not have the space to get to on today. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, our Black Table Talk edition. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. It does not have to be this way, and we, the people, have the power. Take care, everyone. Be well. And most importantly, be light.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.